I live a very simple, predictable lifestyle. Nothing fancy or extraordinary. I don't indulge in things that could impair my judgment or perception, so I'm absolutely certain that what I experienced on New Year's Eve last year wasn't the result of a hallucination or some drunken stupor. It was something real, something that I can't easily explain away. My home is located on the outskirts of a small southern town, one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and the streets are quiet, especially at night. Some of my friends live even farther out, in more isolated areas of the country, only accessible by winding, narrow back roads that seem to lead to nowhere. One of these friends, Darren, lives in a large, almost grand house in a wealthier neighborhood. To get there, you have to take these same back roads, which during the day feel peaceful but at night are downright eerie. Every year, Darren and his family host a big New Year's Eve party, and I always look forward to it. It's a tradition, and I eagerly await the invitation in the mail. It's always a good time with great food, music, and friends, so much so that I never hesitate to accept when the invitation arrives. The weather in the south can be incredibly unpredictable, and that particular year, it didn't get cold until just before New Year's Eve. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the air felt biting and harsh as I drove toward Darren's house. The roads were particularly bumpy and uneven, and the ride was uncomfortable. My old car rattled as I made my way through the dark rural landscape, and I could feel the chill creeping in through the cracks in the window. I usually avoid using my high beams, not wanting to blind other drivers, but on that dark stretch of road, there was no other option. The trees on both sides of the road were so dense that my headlights barely penetrated the darkness. The road twisted and turned in ways that made it hard to anticipate what was coming next. There were no houses along this stretch except for one, an old, dilapidated shack that looked abandoned. I had passed by it countless times, and sometimes I thought I saw lights flickering inside, but I dismissed it as my imagination or a trick of the shadows. About 5 minutes into my drive, I noticed something strange. As I rounded a bend on the road, my headlights illuminated a figure standing off to the side. It was a person, clearly a woman, standing motionless, facing the trees, as if she were waiting for something or someone. She wore a long white gown, which seemed completely out of place given the cold, and her hair cascaded down her back. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was a passerby, someone who had gotten lost or had car trouble. But as I drew closer, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. I kept my high beams on, but I still couldn't make out many details. There was something about her posture that was unnerving, perfectly still, as if she were frozen in time. When I passed her, I exhaled in relief. She didn't move or step in front of my car. I wondered if I should have stopped to check if she needed help, but I dismissed the thought. After all, it was a dark country road, and I didn't want to get out of my car to speak to a stranger in the middle of nowhere. Besides, I was on my way to a party, and it was already late. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I noticed something odd. The woman was still standing in the same spot, but now she was facing me. Her head was turned, and I could just make out the shape of her face in the red glow of my taillights. She didn't appear to be moving, just staring at me. I quickly looked forward and pressed my foot on the gas, eager to put some distance between myself and that strange figure. I didn't want to let my mind wander too much. I wasn't one to get caught up in paranormal thoughts, but there was something about the way she had turned to face me that unsettled me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I arrived at Darren's house around 8 p.m. to the usual warmth and noise of a party in full swing. The house was beautiful, set in a large clearing surrounded by towering trees and thick forests. It looked like something out of a picture book. The driveway was gravel, and it was already filled with cars from other guests who had arrived before me. The air was thick with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and music as I stepped out of my car. It felt good to be around friends and to forget about the unsettling encounter on the road. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the image of that woman in the white gown from my mind. The evening passed with typical party festivities, dancing, eating, and celebrating as we waited for the clock to strike midnight. We toasted the new year with friends, and as the ball dropped, everyone cheered. People started to leave shortly after, but I stayed behind a little longer to help clean up. I always did, as I was close to Darren's family, and it gave me a chance to catch up with them. By the time I left, my car was the only one left parked in front of the house. It was already around 1 a.m., and the night air felt even colder as I started the engine and prepared to head home. I didn't think much of it until I noticed a warning light on the dashboard, the low tire pressure indicator. My car was old, and this happened every time the weather changed, so I wasn't too concerned. But as I checked the tires, I realized that one of them seemed slightly deflated. I decided that I could still make it home though, and that I'd deal with it later. But then, as I turned onto the same road I had driven earlier, I started to feel uneasy again. The road was just as dark and desolate as before, with the trees on either side creating a tunnel of shadows. The silence was oppressive, and the wind had died down entirely, leaving an eerie stillness in the air. I kept thinking about that woman and wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. But as I drove, I began to hear a strange noise coming from the tires. It sounded like something was scraping against the road, a rough, unsettling sound. I pulled over to the side, my heart racing, and stepped out of the car to check the tires. What I saw made my blood run cold. Every tire was shredded, as if something had torn them apart with immense force. This wasn't some random puncture. It was deliberate, and it was terrifying. How could it have happened to all 4 tires? Was I being followed? In a panic, I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no way to reach anyone. I started walking down the road, hoping to find some sign of life or a phone signal. But as I walked, the silence grew even more intense. The usual sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the calls of animals, were completely absent. It felt like the whole world had gone quiet. And then I heard it, a faint sound like a twig snapping underfoot. Someone or something was out there in the woods. My heart raced as I froze in place, unable to move. Then I heard a voice, soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. "I see you." My blood ran cold. The voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was something so wrong about it. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, like the speaker knew exactly who I was and where I was standing. My feet felt like they were glued to the ground, and I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The voice came again, only this time it asked, "Can you see me?" It was then that I finally snapped out of my paralysis and started to run. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to sprint, not knowing what was chasing me, but knowing I had to get away. I didn't dare look back as I ran down the road, desperate to get to Darren's house. The shack was now closer, but I didn't dare stop, not even for a second. The woman, the figure in the white gown, was behind me. I could feel it, but I didn't dare turn around. All I could hear was the sound of my breath, pounding in my ears as I ran faster than I ever had before. Finally, I reached the safety of Darren's house, pounding on the door and begging for help. His mother let me in, and I quickly explained what had happened. Darren, his father, and his mother listened intently, offering their sympathy and concern. They didn't think I was lying, but they didn't know what to make of it. They offered me a place to sleep for the night, and I gladly accepted. I just wanted to put the night behind me. The next morning, the police arrived, and Darren's father went out to check the area around the road. They found no sign of the woman, but they did find strange markings on the trees, as though something had been scratching them. The officers also found a rusty knife in the woods, which they believed had been used to slash my tires. They suggested that the woman had been following me all night, possibly even from the moment I passed her on the road. They found no one living in the shack, but they did find dead animals scattered around the woods, as if something had been hunting them. I'll never forget the way she had followed me, how she had been able to track me so easily, and how her voice had seemed to come from nowhere. I still don't know what happened that night, but I can't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I'll be going to Darren's house again for New Year's Eve this year, but this time I'm not going alone. I'll carpool with friends, and I'll make sure we take the long way around. I won't be making the same mistake again.